For a long time, I thought readiness was something you reach. Like one day you wake up and feel confident enough, clear enough, prepared enough. Like there's a moment where fear disappears and everything finally makes sense. I kept waiting for that moment. I told myself I was being patient, responsible, smart, that I was just preparing before I started. But the truth was simpler. I was afraid of starting before I felt ready. And that fear disguised itself well. It sounded like logic. I just need more time. I need to learn a little more first. I need to feel confident before I begin. Those thoughts feel reasonable. They make you feel like you're not avoiding, you're planning. But time kept passing, and nothing changed. I watched other people start while I waited, not because they were better, but because they were willing to begin without certainty. They didn't look fearless, they just didn't stop themselves. I compared myself to them and assumed they had something I didn't, readiness. I believed they felt prepared in a way I didn't, that they knew something, that they were more confident, more capable, more qualified. So I waited longer. I kept telling myself, soon I'll feel ready, soon I'll feel confident, soon I'll stop doubting. But soon never arrived. Instead, doubt got more comfortable. It settled in. It started deciding for me. I realized something uncomfortable during that phase. Waiting to feel ready was slowly making me feel further behind. The longer I waited, the heavier starting felt. The more time passed, the more pressure I put on myself to get it right the first time. And that pressure made readiness feel even further away. I wasn't stuck because I didn't know what to do. I was stuck because I was waiting for permission from a version of myself that didn't exist yet. I thought readiness was a feeling, something internal, something emotional, but readiness kept moving the goalpost. Every time I got closer, doubt adjusted the requirements. You need more skill. You need more clarity. You need to be more confident than this. And because I respected that voice, I stayed still. I didn't fail during that time. I didn't make mistakes. I also didn't move. And that's the dangerous part of waiting. It feels safe. It feels responsible, but it quietly steals momentum. I started realizing that readiness was becoming an excuse, not intentionally, not consciously, but effectively. It protected me from embarrassment. It protected me from early mistakes. It protected me from failing in public, but it also protected me from learning. Because learning doesn't happen while you're waiting, it happens while you're doing. I didn't talk about this much because from the outside, it looked like I was being careful, thoughtful, strategic. Inside, I felt frustrated. I knew I was capable of more, but I didn't trust myself enough to start imperfectly. I wanted to begin once everything felt aligned. That alignment never came, and the longer I waited, the more I started questioning myself, not my readiness. Why am I still here? Why do I keep delaying? What if I'm just scared? That realization hurt because it meant the thing holding me back wasn't lack of preparation. It was fear of beginning without certainty. I wanted guarantees before effort. I wanted reassurance before risk. I wanted to feel ready before taking responsibility. But life doesn't work in that order. You don't feel ready and then start. You start, and readiness follows. I didn't know that yet. All I knew was that waiting wasn't making me more prepared. It was making me more afraid. And that fear wasn't loud. It was quiet, polite, reasonable, which made it harder to challenge. But that's where this story really begins. Not with actions, but with the realization that waiting to feel ready was costing me more than starting scared ever could. Waiting to feel ready slowly turned into something else, overthinking. At first, it felt productive. I told myself I was planning, learning, preparing. I consumed information, watched others, analyzed every possible outcome, but nothing moved. The more I thought, the heavier starting felt. Every new piece of information didn't bring clarity. It added another reason to wait. What if I choose the wrong approach? What if I start too early and fail? What if I mess it up and prove my doubts right? Those questions didn't push me forward. They froze me. I started mistaking hesitation for intelligence. I believed that thinking everything through meant I was being responsible. In reality, I was avoiding the discomfort of doing. Overthinking is dangerous because it feels like progress. You're busy, you're engaged, you're not idle. But you're not moving either. I kept telling myself I'd start once things made more sense, once I had a better plan, once I felt more confident about my decisions. But clarity didn't come from thinking, it came from action, and I wasn't taking any. Time passed quietly during that phase, not in a dramatic way. Days blended together, weeks slipped by, and every day I didn't start, starting felt harder, because the longer you wait, the higher the stakes feel. Now it wasn't just about beginning, it was about catching up. I started comparing myself to people who had already begun, not just their results, their head start. I felt late, out of sync, like I missed some invisible starting window everyone else knew about. That pressure made overthinking worse. I wanted to make the perfect first move, the kind that would justify the waiting, the kind that would make the delay worth it. And perfection is paralyzing. Because perfection demands certainty, and certainty doesn't exist at the beginning. So I stayed stuck. I planned different versions of the same future in my head. I imagined success. I imagined failure. I imagined reactions, judgments, outcomes. And by the end of each mental cycle, I was more tired, not more prepared. I wasn't afraid of work. I was afraid of the unknown. Overthinking gave me the illusion of control. It let me feel like I was reducing risk. But in reality, it was increasing it because the biggest risk wasn't failing. It was never starting. I started feeling frustrated with myself, not angry, disappointed. I knew I was capable of more than endless preparation. I wasn't learning new things anymore. I was looping the same thoughts, repeating the same fears, rehearsing the same doubts. And doubt grows when you give it too much attention. It feeds on analysis. The more I thought, the more reasons it found to stop me. That's when I realized something uncomfortable. Overthinking wasn't protecting me. It was protecting my fear. It kept me safe from embarrassment, from early mistakes, from being seen before I felt ready, but it also kept me invisible. No progress, no feedback, no experience, just potential unused. And potential without action slowly turns into regret. I didn't need a better plan. I needed a first step. But overthinking had convinced me that starting without certainty was irresponsible. That was the lie. Nothing important begins with certainty. Everything begins with movement. And as long as I stayed trapped in thought, movement couldn't happen. I didn't escape overthinking by thinking my way out of it. I escaped it by acting before my mind could stop me. That realization changed the direction of everything. I didn't start because I felt ready. I started because I ran out of excuses that felt honest. There wasn't a moment where fear disappeared. There wasn't a surge of confidence. There wasn't even a clear plan I trusted completely. What I had was discomfort with staying still. I realized something simple but uncomfortable. If I kept waiting to feel ready, I might never move at all. Readiness had become a moving target, and every time I got closer, doubt pushed it further away. So I took the first step while feeling unprepared, and it felt awful. I felt exposed, like I was doing something I wasn't qualified for, like everyone could see that I didn't know what I was doing, and even though realistically no one was watching that closely. Fear didn't leave when I started. It came with me. My hands weren't steady. My thoughts weren't confident. My inner voice didn't suddenly become supportive. It questioned every move in real time. This isn't good enough. You should have waited longer. You're making a mistake. But I didn't stop. Not because I believed in myself, but because I had already made the decision to move once. And making it again felt slightly easier than turning back. That's when I learned something important. Starting doesn't require confidence. Continuing requires less confidence than starting. The first step is the hardest because it breaks the illusion of safety. Once you've stepped forward, staying still no longer feels neutral. It feels like retreat. I didn't start strong. I didn't start smart. I started awkward. I made mistakes immediately. Small ones, obvious ones, the kind that make you cringe when you replay them later. And instead of confirming my worst fears, something unexpected happened. Nothing terrible occurred. The world didn't collapse. I wasn't rejected instantly. I wasn't exposed as a fraud. I was just learning. That's when I realized how much fear exaggerates the consequences of starting. In my head, beginning without readiness meant disaster. In reality, it meant feedback, and feedback is useful. Confidence didn't appear, but clarity did, not about the outcome, about the next step. I stopped worrying about the entire journey and focused on what was immediately in front of me. I didn't need to know where this would end. I just needed to know what to do next. Action narrowed my focus. Instead of imagining every possible future, I was dealing with the present. And that shift reduced anxiety in a way thinking never could. I also noticed something else. Even without confidence, I was capable. Not amazing, not exceptional, capable enough to continue. That realization matters because capability grows faster than confidence. You don't need to feel ready to become better. You need to practice while feeling unsure. I stopped asking myself how I felt about starting and started asking whether I was willing to show up again tomorrow. That question was easier to answer. Yes, again, just one more time. Doubt didn't disappear during this phase. It walked beside me. but it stopped controlling the direction. I wasn't fearless, I was moving anyway, and movement changes your relationship with fear. When you're standing still, fear feels powerful. When you're moving, fear becomes background noise. I realized that waiting to feel ready had kept me safe, but it had also kept me small. Starting without confidence felt risky, but it made growth possible. This wasn't a dramatic turning point, it was a practical one. I didn't suddenly believe in myself. I proved to myself that belief wasn't required to begin. And once I knew that, the pressure to feel ready disappeared. I wasn't waiting anymore. I was learning while moving. Once I started moving, something unexpected happened. I began learning faster than I ever did while waiting. Not because I suddenly became smarter, but because action forces honesty. When you move, reality responds. When you wait, imagination lies. I made mistakes early, obvious ones, the kind that would have scared me before I started. And yet, each mistake taught me something specific. Not theory, not motivation, practical lessons. I learned what actually mattered. I learned what didn't. I learned where my fears were exaggerated and where my weaknesses were real. And the more I learned, the less space fear had to control me. Waiting had kept everything vague. Starting made things concrete. Instead of wondering, what if I mess up? I was asking, how do I fix this? That shift is powerful because problems you can fix are less scary than fears you imagine. I stopped needing confidence to continue. Experience started doing the work confidence was supposed to do. Each attempt made the next one easier, not emotionally, but mechanically. I knew what to expect. I wasn't guessing anymore. Learning while moving also taught me humility. I realized how much I didn't know, but instead of discouraging me, it focused me. I wasn't overwhelmed by the whole journey anymore. I was just improving one small thing at a time. Action narrowed my world, and that was calming. I noticed that confidence didn't arrive as a feeling. It arrived as familiarity. Things that once felt intimidating became routine. Tasks that once caused anxiety became manageable. Not exciting, manageable. And manageable is enough to keep going. I also noticed that perfection stopped mattering. When you're moving, perfection becomes impractical. You don't have time to overthink every detail because the next step is already waiting. Mistakes didn't feel like failures anymore. They felt like instructions. I wasn't embarrassed by them the way I thought I'd be. Most mistakes happened quietly. Most corrections were invisible. Most progress didn't need an audience. I realized something important during this phase. Readiness doesn't create competence. Competence creates readiness. I didn't become ready before starting. I became capable by starting early. And capability changes how you see yourself. Not in a loud, confident way, but in a grounded one. I trusted myself more, not because I believed in my potential, but because I had evidence that I could adjust when things went wrong. That trust mattered, because once you trust your ability to adapt, fear loses leverage. You don't need guarantees anymore. You don't need everything figured out. You just need the next step. Learning while moving also changed my relationship with time. I stopped feeling late. I stopped feeling behind. I stopped comparing my starting point to other people's middle, because comparison makes sense only when you're standing still. When you're moving, your reference point changes. You're no longer asking, am I good enough yet? You're asking, am I better than yesterday? That question is easier to answer, and answering it daily builds momentum. I didn't suddenly feel ready during this phase. That word stopped meaning much to me. What I felt instead was progress, slow, imperfect, real. Progress doesn't announce itself loudly, it just keeps you moving. And once movement becomes normal, fear doesn't disappear, it falls behind. That's when I understood something clearly. Waiting to feel ready delays learning. Starting early accelerates it. I didn't start because I was prepared. I became prepared because I started. And that realization changed how I approach everything that came after. If you're waiting to feel ready, I want you to hear this gently. You might be waiting forever. Not because you're incapable, but because readiness isn't something that arrives before action. It's something that grows because of it. I spent a long time believing that one day I'd feel confident enough to begin, that fear would disappear, that doubt would quiet down, that everything would finally line up. None of that happened. What happened was simpler. I started anyway, not with belief, not with certainty, with discomfort. And that discomfort didn't break me, it taught me. If I could speak to the version of myself who was stuck waiting, the one overthinking every move, delaying every decision, I wouldn't motivate them with success stories. I'd tell them this: you don't need to feel ready, you need to move. Readiness is a myth we use to protect ourselves from early mistakes. It makes us feel responsible while we stay still. It sounds wise, but it costs us time. Action is what teaches you what you need to know. You don't learn confidence by thinking. You learn it by surviving experience. Most people you admire didn't feel ready either. They just didn't let that stop them. They learned publicly. They adjusted quietly. They improved while moving. They didn't wait for permission. They gave themselves none. You don't need clarity to start. You don't need confidence. You don't need guarantees. You need one step and then another. If you're afraid of starting scared, remember this. Fear doesn't disappear when you wait. It disappears when you prove to yourself that you can handle it. Every time you act despite doubt, fear loses a little authority, not all at once, slowly. That's how confidence is built, not from positive thinking, not from motivation, from evidence. Evidence that you didn't quit when it felt uncomfortable. Evidence that you adjusted instead of freezing. Evidence that you kept moving when you didn't feel ready. You don't become ready before you begin. You become ready because you began. And here's the part most people miss. Starting early doesn't mean you won't fail. It means you'll learn sooner. Waiting doesn't reduce mistakes. It delays them. If mistakes are unavoidable, and they are, you might as well meet them while you still have time to adjust. If you're listening to this and thinking, I don't feel ready, that's okay. You're not supposed to. Readiness is a reward, not a requirement. The only requirement is staying. Start imperfectly. Start unsure. Start scared. Just don't keep waiting for a feeling that only action can give you. I didn't feel ready. I started anyway, and everything I needed to learn met me on the way.